Hey, video professional, let me ask you a few questions. If a crazy bride wants her money back, what do you do? When you have people in the background of your videos, are you in legal hot water if they didn't sign a release? And who actually owns your raw footage? If you don't know the answers to these questions, you may want to listen up. You'll be surprised by what two attorneys have to say.
We're on a mission to rid the world of bad video.
Bye-bye.
This is the DV Show.
Target in range.
Bad video sucks.
Welcome to this edition of the DV Show podcast. My name is Brian. You know, making a film or video is an exciting prospect, and there's great temptation to start as quickly as possible. But before you pick up that camera, any video worth making requires a great deal of planning and preparation, and that includes ensuring you comply with all legal issues. Basically, you want to cover your butt. So on this week's podcast, we stepped into the videographer room on Clubhouse, where two attorneys, Laura Cosgrove and Kevin Ross from éclat Law in Central Florida, they gave some surprising answers to some legal issues videographers are facing. Now, if you're not on Clubhouse yet, you should be. The Videographers Club is a great place to hang out and learn or offer some advice, and I'll put an official invite in the show notes of this podcast. All right, Laura and Kevin, let's start with our first question coming from Philip, who has an issue about the wedding he shot. Phil, you're having some issues with a bride wanting her money back and a retainer?
She paid my $1,500 retainer. I sent her a proposal in the contract. In the contract, you pay the retainer. The retainer is non-refundable. Then she tells me that her wedding planner doesn't want to work with her anymore, and now I can see why. So let's keep in mind there's $1,500 retainer already paid. There is $1,500 due for the wedding and the rest of everything. They're now demanding all of the money back. What do I do?
What a mess. Kevin, can you offer some insight?
Yes, Philip, it all depends on the state where you live, because different states have very different ways they handle what you're in, and is an oral contract because the person didn't sign the agreement. Okay. And so different states handle those things differently. Some will you will rely on the communications, especially written communications back and forth, to establish the contract, saying at least at a minimum your retainer amount would be non-refundable. Some states are very, very, very tough on those non-refundables if somebody has not signed it. So it really depends on the state where you're at. It's a difficult one to answer because I haven't seen your agreements or the papers, but generally the courts will err on the side of making it refundable since the person didn't get anything in return for your time. For the month. But they did because I did go out and shoot the dinner party that they asked me to shoot, as well as turn over footage and an edited video of it. Oh, okay. Well, that's different. So then if that being the case, you would be entitled to the reasonable value of your services for doing all of that, and then it would be justified for you to keep the retainer. And if you feel that your time was worth more than what was paid, you can pursue that even without a contract.
I'm not surprised that the first one was a wedding videography issue. That's an area to be super careful about, making sure what your contracts say and that everybody's on the same page and that you have the contingencies in place for changes. I can only imagine how it's been in the last year for those of you that do event photography and videography with all the cancellations and rescheduling. So just kind of reinforcing to make sure your contracts are very clear and signed when you can get them signed. I know sometimes it just seems like you got the money, so that means everybody's in agreement, but try and get those signatures when you can.
All right, David has the next question.
Hey guys, I have a question that I was just hoping to get a final answer to. If somebody is in your shot, and I've heard like percentage of the face and things like that, but I was wondering if there was like a solid answer. I've heard if their back, you can't see their face, you don't have to get a release. But then I've heard that there's like a percentage of a face, like a half turn towards the camera. Is there any kind of hard rule to, if you have a composed shot, somebody's in the background and their part of their face is actually showing, there's a tipping point when you actually have to get a release? Is there something like that? Just curious.
I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. I'd have to look further into that particular one, but I think if there's any way that person could be recognized, that you would want to err on the side of getting a release, or at least if you're filming in public, having some sort of a notice up that you are filming, to make sure that nobody in the vicinity can, say that they weren't aware that they were being filmed. But again, unless you look at it, it would be very fact-based, and so you'd want to probably err on the side of getting a release if you're able to identify the person. And that's where I always recommend that when you're doing your work, to really do an inventory of everything that's going to be in the film, so that before you start rolling, you have release. Because, in that one, if the person had turned, you would have needed it. So I would err on the side of getting releases, even if it's just a partial image of them.
I would concur with Laura's recommendation. I've litigated these type of cases, and generally you would win that. I think in your circumstance, you would win it because inadvertent or minor. But the problem is, do you want to deal with it? So if you usually give somebody at least the credit and get the release, you save yourself a lot of headache. Yeah.
So now, what if it's a street photography? Obviously, that's a genre. And if you is street or journalistic style photography, is there some sort of other rules to that? Like if you're not doing a, on sticks production, you're doing more street style. Is there anything in relation to that? Like if there's people that are sort of milling about in the background, how does that work? Because I feel like journalists shoot people all the time with people in the background. Is that a different set of rules, or?
There are different set of rules. The main one is, are you gaining financially yourself for it? So where you have photojournalists who are just reporting the news, and technically the newspapers do make money and stuff like that, but they're not using it for entertainment value, using it for reporting and for informational. And so they get I can't cite you directly the exception that they have for that, but that is really the distinction. If you're using it what they call pecuniary gain, to make money for yourself, as opposed for informational purposes or for the benefit of the government or whatever stuff. That's the distinction. So if you're doing it for yourself, you have your own company, you're making money, you're posting on your website, all driven to make profit. Your rules, you get the strictest of rules of beginning to have to get people to get releases and stuff like that versus a photojournalist. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Now, does documentary filmmaking fall into that category? If you were documenting, let's say, a homeless crisis, but you would potentially be selling that, maybe? Does that fall more on the filmmaking for profit or more on informational side of the line?
It would still fall on the filmmaking for profit side of the line. It's really so, because the big media companies have the money, the power, the lobbyists. They've created an exception. It really accepts out news media from the rest of us. So I would never I would never recommend anybody put themselves in the same category as them, like a CNN and Fox and all those folks. So you would always be falling in the category of I'm doing this for profit.
So, and especially with the documentaries and, in your example, filming homeless, well, there may be somebody there who, doesn't want people to know that they're homeless, or it could be, something, entering into their privacy rights. So there you would want to definitely get releases, or at least post that you are filming in the area, and let them know.
I have a listener who is a scuba diver, graduated from a class, and went scuba diving, recorded some really cool footage of underwater video, and brought it back to the place that gave him the scuba certification. Just gave it to one of the employees, and they watched it, they loved it, whatever, and they kept it in the store. So come to find out, he comes back to the store and come to find out that he sees his photos on the brochures to promote the scuba classes, and he sees videos in the shop, his video in the shop, promoting the store's scuba classes. So he's like, hello, that was meant only for you. Why are you making money off of this? And he's kind of saying, okay, what's my legal recourse here, if any? I mean, what would it be? I mean, what would you guys say to that?
Well, I would say to you, Brian, you could tell him a couple of different things, depending on the state. So I always preface my questions that every state isn't the same. We're all generally the same throughout the country, but different states have different nuances. And then there's also a federal law component that applies to all of this because media can go beyond the state boundaries and stuff. The answer to this question is not as easy as he probably would like, but if you gave it to them as a gift, like here, you can have this, do whatever you want with it, kind of the conversation, then he has no recourse because you gave it to them for that purpose. If he didn't do it with that intent, which sounds like he didn't, then they would have to compensate him. So just because he allowed them to have it for them to use to show, and maybe show without making a profit on it, doesn't mean that they can go and make a profit on it. So because they didn't purchase the rights to do whatever they want with his media, it's basically he has some intellectual property rights to it. They shouldn't be making a profit on it without, at a minimum, giving him credit for his work, but let alone not even compensating for his time. So he does have some recourse. Obviously, if they're not making that much money on it, you probably don't want get into lengthy lawsuits, but he should consider approaching them about coming into some type of a licensing agreement where he can decide what they can and can't do with it, and more importantly, also at least getting some credit for it. So if someone sees his work, it's like, man, this guy's pretty good, I'd like to contact him. Maybe that has some value to him, and that's separate and distinguished from making a couple of dollars from it. But he does have some recourse. I would recommend that his first approach would be to try to make some type of a licensing arrangement with them where he can at least get credit for the work, and that can have a benefit for him.
I agree with Kevin. And also, I mean, he does have the copyright protection in the work because he created it. And so the fact that he gave it to him doesn't take away his common law copyright. He hasn't registered it, so he doesn't have, I assume he hasn't registered it with the Copyright Office, so he wouldn't have what are considered statutory damages, but he could ask for as damages the amount that they would have paid for him to do it. His actual damages if he had been selling it to them to use in their promotion, and it doesn't sound like he's in a situation. I mean, I'm sure they're pretty amicable. So, but you can, if somebody is using your work and you want them to stop, you can write a cease and desist letter to have them take it down if it wasn't amicable. But I think probably Kevin's approach is the more productive one, because he probably would get more out of it by having the credit and having people see his work and then getting more work if that's something that he wants to pursue. It doesn't sound like he was maybe a professional videographer. So anyway, just some other options that he might have if he wanted to use them.
Some great insight into these questions, Kevin and Laura. Before we get into more questions from the audience, why don't we take this time to tell us a little bit about yourselves and your background?
I started my own law firm about 7 years ago. I worked at a big firm in Miami. And just wanted to do my own thing and deal with clients more with individuals, small business owners, not just the big corporations. So I started my own firm and invited Laura and others that work with me to do that and do things like we're doing today. One of the things we enjoy doing is educating the general community about legal issues so that people can identify when they have problems and maybe help themselves or know how to get help, and not always wait till the last minute to get help. But we find a lot of times people come to us. If they had come to us a month or two earlier, we could have done a lot more for them or made it a lot less expensive. And with that, I'll let Laura tell everybody a little bit about herself.
I work with business owners and individuals and their transactional work. So whether that's creating contracts or determining whether they can use certain, in particular with the arts and entertainment, copyright issues, intellectual property, protecting their intellectual property. Those are key areas. And I started out my practice focusing mostly on the arts because I'm passionate about supporting the arts and collecting art. But then I transitioned and added in the entertainment arena. And that's why I'm especially excited to be here today, because I feel like videographers really fall in both categories. I mean, you are artists, and I'm sure a lot of y'all use your videos to create art, as well as using it in the entertainment business. So that I like that you have the crossover here, and I'll be really interested in hearing what some of your questions are and which area they lean more towards.
I will put a link to their law firm in the show notes of this podcast. All right, let's get back into the Videographer room on Clubhouse. And again, if you are not a Clubhouse member yet, you should be. The Videographers Club is where you should go. It's a great place to hang out and learn or offer some advice. And again, I will put an official invite in the show notes of this podcast. Miles has a question about release forms.
So for starting a small videography business, where would I go to get like official release forms? And could I make my own? I probably answered my own question for the second one, but I do want to know where I could go get like official release forms, because I do documentary film and a lot of stuff is interview based, so I need a lot of release forms to post stuff on YouTube and my social media. So where would I go to get those?
Hey, Miles, this is Kevin. There's a lot of, Google, fortunately or unfortunately, Google will take you to a lot of the sources that you can look at. If you find forms, I would make sure you look at ones that are related with a trade organization. A lot of video and other type of production companies put forms up there for people starting businesses and novices, I guess is what they would refer to them to as. They'll make forms available. I would trust more ones that come from recognized organizations as opposed to, I don't know who drafted this thing, but they stuck it on the internet. But there's many organizations that have free forms available, some of the basic stuff.
I agree. And you may want to look in your community to see if they have volunteer lawyers for the arts or an arts and business council. Sometimes you can go to them, especially when you're starting up a business. That's kind of their target group, and they can help you with all parts of starting your business in addition to the releases.
All right, C, go ahead with your question.
By me being a cannabis artist, I'm an enthusiast. I'm an activist. I definitely smoke a lot, and in my videos, there's a lot of cannabis. I shot a video a year ago that actually got banned on every platform, including YouTube. Wouldn't even post it. There's no vulgar women in there. There's just literally me smoking weed. But I have another video that's up that's at like 40,000 views right now, and there's been no issues, no blocking or anything. Is there any licensing that I'm supposed to have or anything that I can do in the future to prevent that or keep that from going on?
As far as the different platforms' rules and what they allow, I think they're all pretty specific. So I would say you need to read through that. I don't know why one was taken down and the other wasn't, without reading through their specific rules and then looking at the two videos. So I think just going back to seeing what the parameters are would be your best first step on those.
Most of these companies spot check. They don't check every single thing that is posted on their platform. They usually respond to either a complaint or a complaint by somebody who that has viewed your video. So some folks may have not have resented or had any complaints about the one and they did about the other one. That could be it. Or it could just be that when they were doing their quality check or their spot checking, they caught one and they just haven't caught the other. So it could be a combination of things why one survived and the other one didn't. But they do have the right to regulate what's on their platforms. And there's nothing you can do in advance other than I know YouTube doesn't necessarily do it either. So there's nothing you can do in advance to say, I'm going to put this up there. Let's get a license agreement so I can keep my content up there irrespective. I don't think most of them do it that way. It's just a matter of kind of understanding what they will and won't reject and trying to put your format, your media to their requirements. But most of it is generated by somebody saying, hey, I don't like this, or enough people doing it where they paid attention to it.
Right. And also be aware of the, I think it's YouTube is the one that has like a 3-strike rule. So the idea of, putting it up there and see if it flies is probably not the best approach either. If they start targeting you, you could be banned completely from posting on YouTube.
Umberto, you have a question.
Okay, no worries. I was just real specific to film commission compared to a city mayor's office related to resources available for legal purposes of filming or producing narrative or documentary.
Okay. I think I understand the question. I just want to be clear. Are you looking for like incentives, places that give incentives to film in their vicinity, in their city, in their state? Or are you looking for something related to resources to help you do your filming? I'm not sure what you were looking for.
It's more of just a general education on it. Between if I was going to go to a film commission towards learning of like where I can film, also like if what resources are available through that, and then also related to like in the city, I would be going to the city council for resources in terms of like documentation that's required. Signage and whatnot.
Right. Yes, they should be able to. So once you pick your location, they should be able to let you know what permitting is needed to do the filming, if I'm understanding your question, and any forms that you need to fill out to have it properly permitted.
And we will go with the next question coming from Ryan.
So I'd like to hear your guys' insight on one of the only cases I have heard of that's being fought right now. Gentleman sent an unsolicited picture of himself to a woman, and she put the photo up on the blockchain, and it sounds like he's taking her to court over it.
Yeah, that's the same kind of issues you had with Facebooks and all those other, and I don't think the law will be any different there. You don't have the ability of the platform provider to protect you and to have some recourse there. So I think that things will go more directly to the court. The issues don't really change. Can't do that and stuff like that. There's a lot of different laws that you violate and that have nothing to do with money and stuff like that. But I think, but those are the kind of things I'm talking about. Those are the kind of things you'll start to see more and more and more as more people become involved in the industry. Grows as we're in America and we sue over everything, so the opportunities will be there, and that's why I caution folks that as you get into this, while it's a new platform, the same old problems always apply of human decency, making sure you're not trying to you're doing the right things in terms financially and being fair to people whose images and things you're using, protecting yourself, the things that you create, you're putting into a media that into a platform that's new to everybody. There's no precedent for you to look at and say, well, this is how it's always happened. So you're going to have all new set of experiences. And so when you're going to something like that, you should always protect yourself, think twice before getting involved.
What about a scenario like of a various TMZ moment? What if you were to see a celebrity out and they were to be urinating on a wall and you were to put that up onto the blockchain?
I think you'll get sued just like you would in any other platform, but I think that because of the celebrities, they don't have the same, they obviously aren't going to be able to get you for a defamation case, huh? But you'll have some of the same, it doesn't change the issues. The law hasn't really changed. Some of the things that certain platforms have to prevent some certain things from happening so they can avoid the lawsuit are just not there. I mean, that's kind of the nice and fun thing about the platform is that this is something new. We don't have all the restrictions that we used to have, but as it begins to develop and more people start to use it and more people start to get involved, you can rest assured that regulations and rules will eventually apply, and it'll eventually come into the same hang-ups, for lack of a better way of describing it, that you've had with everything else.
Jacqueline, you had a question.
With that, I wanted to ask a question. Kevin and Laura, what are some common cases that you see among videographers or content creators that you come across that you can maybe shed some light on for anyone listening?
I will tell you that what it's a shifting. So I've been, like I said, I've been a lawyer for 28 years. I've done a lot of intellectual property, copyright, trademark infringement stuff. And what's interesting I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years in particular is a shifting where, when I hate to date myself, but when I was a young guy, it was film, and film was very hard to copy unless you had the film and you copied it and you redistributed. As the internet and video became more prominent, and the ability to take images and take somebody else's creations and replicate it on a massive scales has changed and has gone up exponentially. What I've seen is a shift with the videographers and people in the video world. They're just falling prey to a lot of people stealing their content. You think I put it on YouTube. Well, just about anybody can take your stuff off of YouTube and use it, and it's very hard to track who's used it and where it's doing and what they're doing with it. So is the biggest thing I've seen shift over the last 5 years is the theft of people's content. Whether it be video or photography or anything like that. And it's pretty rampant. Laura and I represent some clients that have issues with people using their content, or some of their writers and stuff using content from other folks that didn't realize, I didn't realize they took their thing and I didn't give them credit for it. It's just the ease with which your content is being taken and replicated and sold and resold or used or reused without you even being aware. And I think that's a very, very, very big problem for a lot of people. I'll let Laura finish if she wants.
No, I agree. That has been a trend that's been growing over the past years. And I think when content did become so available, that people just felt like, well, the internet's free, so everything on it is as well, and started using other people's content without their permission or without licensing and paying. So it's definitely something that comes up frequently. The other area I see with videographers is when they're contracted to do a special event, or and going back to the weddings or any type of a basically it's a commissioned work. Looking at it from kind of the artist side, just not being really clear in the contract what the expectations are. Because if you aren't clear, you're going to have different expectations of what your customer is expecting to get and what you're expecting to provide. So those issues are the ones that consistently come up where there wasn't a meeting of the minds before the project got started, and then they're trying to figure it out on the back end, which is never a good place to be, because then nobody's happy.
Yeah, and I would recommend to a lot of you who are starting out in the business and stuff, it's expensive in some senses, but, it doesn't hurt to get yourself a decent lawyer to get you the right kind of forms and things, because I also think another area, in addition to the content being stolen, is this. I think we had somebody on earlier, just getting stiffed out of your work. I mean, someone, hires you to do some work, and you're really willing, able, excited to do the work, but you got to get paid for your time, and and making sure that you have the recourse to be able to make sure you get your time compensated for, and then you follow your own rules. I hear so many times that people, I sent them a contract where they never sent it, and until they signed it, don't do anything, including taking their money, and the money's great, but you got to have them sign the documents that you need to protect yourself, because people stiff you guys all the time. I mean, that's a big complaint I heard it twice a day. People didn't get paid for their time. And what are my rights? You just got to make sure you cover yourself no matter what. And you also want to make sure you limit your liability, because that's another thing that, you do. You go to a site, something happens wrong, and all of a sudden it's your fault, So you just got to think about those things. And so investing early on to have someone just give you at least a decent set of documents to work with. Yes, there's a lot of things available on the internet, and they're free, and they're forms, but they're exactly that. There's a reason why they're free. They're a good place to start. But, you may be best to say, hey, I found this free form. I put my own ideas, and I'm going to pay someone $600-700 to look at it. Now I got a form that's a lot better. That may be cheaper than having someone draft it for you from scratch, but you should do something like that because it'll save you a lot of headache and time and money in the future.
Ben's question is next.
Thank you for hosting this, and it's very beneficial for all to shed the light on the legal side. My direct question is, as we are shooting videographs and still, who's the legitimate owner of the raw files in this shoot? When you are contracting with someone that he is going to just get the final product of the shoot. So is it legally, that the client asks for the raw and you have the right to not to give it to him?
I think I'm understanding your question, and it's something that I actually was going to bring up when we were just talking in general. The owner of the work is going to be in the contract if you have a contract with them to make the production. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, my contract says that I'm going to just deliver the final movie or the final film or the clips, and that's it. Nothing mentioned about the owner of the raw files.
Right. So the raw material you're talking about, I guess.
Correct.
Yes, you are right.
Okay. So typically in your contract, you're going to have something that defines who owns what, and often I see, and it's normal when you're providing video for a movie or a larger piece, is that you'll either say that it's a work for hire, or you will say, even if it doesn't technically fall into a work for hire, it's going to be a work for hire. So you relinquish all of your rights to the works when you hand it over to them.
Yeah, I'll follow up on Laura's because I had dealt with this. So, it all depends too on the contractual where you're doing the work. If it has international implications, if it just has national implications, or just state implications. But the general rule to follow is if it's not in the contract, assume that everything you're doing for somebody else, they hire it and can take everything. That's generally how the law is going to look at it. So you, as the provider, are obligated to write and say, this is what you get, and this is what I keep, and I have the right to use it, do this and do that. You have to spell that out generally in your contract, not only what you're keeping, but what you can do with what you're keeping, or they're going to have recourse against you. So if it's silent as to that issue, even if you say, I'm just going to deliver the final product, because it's your contract and you're the provider, a court would look at it in a way that's least favorable to you because you're the person that's doing it, and most favorable to the other person. So the burden is always on you to make sure you cover yourself so that you can keep whatever it is you intend to keep. And that's just a good rule of thumb to follow whenever you're selling your work to somebody else. This is what you want to do with it. For example, I have a client that sells, I won't get into specifics, but we make sure that people can only, you get the final product, and you're not even allowed to reproduce this. Even though I sent you the final product, you can't even reproduce it and resell it to somebody else. You get to enjoy this for your own personal consumption. We had to write that in there because once we sell the painting or the piece of art to the person, if they can do whatever they want. They can make thousands and thousands of prints and resell the person's work over and over again, probably make more money than they paid for it. So you have to be very specific as to what you want to limit the person buying the product to do. So if they only get the end product and I get to keep all the raw and footage and everything else that's associated with creating what I gave you, and I can do whatever I want with it, you have to be very specific about that.
And finally, our last question coming from Will.
So I'm running into issues where Ben was just talking about with clients. They're wanting the raw files, and I'll put in my contract that they're not. If they want the raw files, it's a certain, you're going to have to pay a fee for it. But I don't know why clients think that they're automatically going to get the raw files when I give them the final product. And I tell them in the contract what they're actually getting. Like I did an Arabic wedding, and she thought that since I was there for 6 hours, that she was going to get a 6-hour video. And in the contract, it stated she was getting a 3-minute highlight video. And like, now when it comes to like contracts, especially video purposes, like my contracts are like, I think like 7 pages long, only because like I make sure that that my contracts are so detailed, like you were just saying, that you're not going to be able to remember everything or any scenario. So, that's just my question. Like where are clients getting this from? Are they getting it from other people that they know, or is it because other videographers are just giving them a highlight reel and they're giving them raw files?
Well, I think part of it, Will, is just ignorance on the people buying it, and they think I'm paying for it, so I get everything. So, I think so. Some of it is that, and maybe some of it is their dealings with others, but probably most of it is just ignorance. But I would suggest to you that, especially when you have longer contracts, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced this, but a lot of times when you have certain contracts and there's 4 or 5 paragraphs, I really need you to double read, because most people sign these things without even reading it. You make them initial that paragraph so you can know for sure that they read that specifically. So when you go back and you talk about the contract, you can say, I had you look at this one, initial it, because this was an important paragraph. You knew this. And so, something like the raw footage, the raw files, maybe that's one of those you make people initial that paragraph so they can understand right up front. If I don't remember anything else from this contract, I'm paying, I'm getting this thing, and I'm not getting that thing. And the rest of the stuff they can ignore. So maybe highlighting the paragraphs that you're feeling, that you're experiencing some pushback from your customers, saying, okay, I'm going to have them re-acknowledge these 3 or 4 paragraphs by initialing them separately when they sign.
Well, that does it for another edition of the DV Show podcast. I want to thank attorneys Laura Cosgrove and Kevin Ross from éclat Law for their time and insight. We'll put a link to their firm in the show notes of this podcast. Also want to thank Jacqueline and Ryan from the Videographer's Room on Clubhouse for putting it all together, along with Philip, David, Miles, C, Umberto, Ben, and Will. Thanks for powering the conversation. Now, if you're not on Clubhouse yet, you should be. It's a lot of fun. The Videographers Club is a great place to hang out and learn or offer some advice. I'll put an official invite in the show notes of this podcast. We'll talk to you next week.
Video production just got easier. The DV Show.
Serious about creating better video? You're in the right place. Subscribe to our free online coaching service and expand your learning beyond our popular podcast.